Imagine waking up on a Sunday morning. You make coffee. You grab your keys. You walk outside. And suddenly, the entire country has forgotten how to drive. Not because of a disaster, not because of a war, but because overnight, the rules changed. This was Sweden, September 3rd, 1967. At 4:50 in the morning, every vehicle in the country was ordered to stop. Cars, buses, trucks, taxis, even bicycles. For 10 minutes, Sweden became a nation without traffic. Then, at exactly 5 a.m., millions of people had to do something they had never done before. They had to start driving on the right side of the road. 6 million people, millions of vehicles, one national decision. And here is the strangest part. A few years earlier, the Swedish people had voted overwhelmingly against it. Around 83% said no. But the government did it anyway. This is the story of Dagen H, the day Sweden switched sides, the day an entire country tried to unlearn one of the most automatic habits in modern life. And somehow, it worked. To understand why this was such a big deal, you need to understand Sweden's strange driving problem. In the 1960s, most of continental Europe was already driving on the right. Norway drove on the right, Finland drove on the right, Denmark drove on the right. But Sweden still drove on the left. That meant every time a driver crossed the border, the road rules suddenly flipped. And these were not borders with giant warning gates and dramatic checkpoints. In many places, you could simply drive across. One moment, you were in Sweden, keeping left. A few seconds later, you were in Norway or Finland, and you were supposed to keep right. For tourists, truck drivers, and everyday travelers, that was a recipe for confusion. But the border problem was only part of it. There was an even stranger issue inside Sweden itself. Most cars on Swedish roads had the steering wheel on the left side. That makes sense if you drive on the right side of the road, but Sweden was driving on the left. So Swedish drivers were sitting near the edge of the road, not near the center. When they tried to overtake another vehicle, they had a terrible view of oncoming traffic. They often had to lean out, guess, or rely on a passenger to see what was coming. It was awkward, it was dangerous, and as traffic increased, it became harder and harder to ignore. Sweden had a system that no longer fit the world around it, but fixing that system meant asking millions of people to change a habit they had practiced their entire lives.
In 1955, Sweden asked the public a simple question. Should the country switch to driving on the right? The answer was not even close. The Swedish people said no. Not a small no. Not a maybe. Around 83% voted against the change. For most people, the idea sounded insane. They had learned to drive on the left. Their parents had driven on the left. The streets, signs, buses, and habits of the entire country were built around driving on the left. Changing all of that sounded like inviting chaos. People imagined crashes at every intersection, buses stopping on the wrong side, drivers panicking in the middle of the street. And honestly, that fear made sense. Driving is not something people think about every second. It becomes muscle memory. You turn without thinking. You check mirrors without thinking. You enter a roundabout without thinking. Now imagine telling an entire country, tomorrow morning, do all of that in reverse. For years, the debate continued, but by the early 1960s, Sweden's leaders believed the old system had become too dangerous and too isolated. The neighboring countries drove on the right. Many cars were already built for right-side traffic, and the old arrangement was creating real safety problems. So in 1963, the Swedish parliament made the decision. The country would switch. The date was set, Sunday, September 3rd, 1967. Sweden called it Dagen H. The H stood for högertrafik, right-hand traffic.
Once the decision was made, Sweden had 4 years to prepare. And the preparation became one of the largest public information campaigns the country had ever seen. The Dagen H logo appeared everywhere. On posters, on newspapers, on television, on everyday products. People saw reminders in schools, workplaces, shops, and public spaces. The message was simple. Remember the date. Remember the side. Keep right. But this was not just about warning people. Sweden had to change the way an entire country behaved. Driving is automatic. You do not think about which side of the road feels normal. You just do it. So the government had to repeat the message again and again until everyone knew that one specific morning would be different. Sunday, September 3rd, 1967. That was the date when old habits had to stop. But teaching people was only half the job, because the physical country itself also had to change.
Road signs had to be changed. Intersections had to be redesigned. Lane markings had to be repainted. Traffic lights had to be adjusted. And the most complicated problem was public transport. Many Swedish buses had doors on the left side because passengers used to enter and exit from the left. But after the switch, those doors would open into the middle of the road. That was impossible. So buses had to be modified, replaced, or taken out of service. Some had new doors added. Some were specially prepared for the transition. Some looked like machines caught between two different worlds. Then came the final night. Saturday, September 2nd, 1967. As the country went to sleep, workers moved through the streets. New signs that had been covered for weeks or months were uncovered. Old signs came down. Road markings were changed. Barriers were moved. Police prepared for the morning. The goal was almost impossible. When Sweden woke up, the country had to look familiar, but function completely differently. By the early hours of Sunday morning, the streets grew quiet. The old system was about to disappear.
At 4:50 a.m., the order came. Stop. Across Sweden, vehicles pulled over and waited. On highways, trucks moved to the side. In cities, taxis stopped in the street. Drivers sat behind the wheel, listening to the radio. For 10 minutes, the country paused. No normal traffic, no usual rhythm. Just a strange silence before the reset. Then came 5 a.m. The moment Sweden changed sides. Drivers slowly moved from the left side of the road to the right. Not fast, not confidently, not like normal. They moved carefully, almost nervously, as if the whole country had become a driving school. People who had been driving for decades suddenly felt like beginners again. Every turn required attention. Every intersection felt unfamiliar. Every habit had to be questioned. But Sweden did not explode into chaos. The streets were slow. Police were everywhere. People were cautious. Children stayed home from school in many places. Some workplaces opened later. The whole country moved carefully through its first morning on the right. And that caution changed everything. Because the disaster everyone expected never really came.
Before Dagen H, many people expected disaster. Hospitals prepared. Police were ready. The press watched closely. A country changing its traffic system overnight sounded like the perfect recipe for confusion. But the disaster never came. In the early period after the switch, Sweden's roads actually became calmer. Not because driving on the right was magically safer.
but because everyone was scared. And when people are scared, they pay attention. Drivers slowed down. They kept more distance. They checked every turn. They stopped relying on instinct. For a short time, Sweden's roads were filled with millions of nervous beginners. And that nervousness may have saved lives. Eventually, people adapted. The fear faded. Right-side driving became normal, and the strange morning of September 3, 1967 became history. But Dagen H was more than a traffic story. It proved that a system that feels permanent can still be changed. A habit that feels automatic can still be relearned. And an entire country, if prepared carefully enough, can pass through fear without falling apart. That is what makes Dagen H so fascinating. It was not just the day Sweden switched sides. It was the day a country proved that even the most ordinary parts of life can be redesigned. Thanks for watching Global Facts. And wherever you are, drive safely.